fall season. I'm super excited about this. Okay, I just have to take a picture of all of you. So everybody say cheese in a second. Or say ghost. How about everybody say ghost? And 1, 2, 3, say ghost. Awesome. Thank you for humor. All right. This is one of my actual favorite topics to talk about. I've been researching lighthouses in Michigan since the late 1990s. And early on in my research, I was actually assigned a project to take and create a database, a spreadsheet of all the lighthouses in Michigan. And it was the name of the light, what city it was in, how tall it was, when it was built, if it was remodeled, like all these things. And there was a column on that spreadsheet that said, is it haunted? And I was just supposed to put a check mark in there, or an X, right? Well, about 2 years into that, I kept thinking about, what about that column of all those X's? I want to know more about that. I don't want to know, I mean, yeah, it's cool when it was built, how tall it was, but it's the people behind these lighthouses that are really the most fascinating part of it for me. And so this is before the internet was big, I guess. And I was going and visiting lighthouses and museums and libraries searching for ghost stories. And I had actually grown up in a house where ghost stories were pretty prominent. My mom had her first ghost experience when I was a kid. And what sealed it for me that ghosts really do exist is that my daughter, at the age of 4, 17 years after my mom told me her ghost story, had the exact same encounter with the exact same ghost in the exact same building. And my mom said to me, did you tell her about it? Is that why she's talking about it? And I said, certainly I didn't tell a 4-year-old that there was a ghost in the bathroom. Because I really wanted her to go in there, right? But my daughter, who is a young adult now, she's been having experiences most of her life. And so I've been fascinated with this paranormal world. I've done a lot of research. Right now I'm doing some more academic type of things and the economic impact of ghost tourism or paranormal tourism, because it really is a huge industry across the world, really. So, a couple questions before we get started. How many of you actually believe in ghosts? All right, that's good. I mean, let me put it to you this way. Some people say, well, I don't know, I've never seen a ghost, so it can't exist. How many of you have seen $1 million? You know it's there, right? So, I kind of believe that it's out there. So, how many of you have actually had a ghost experience of your own? Few of you. Okay, myself as well. So, all right, we're going to have some fun tonight. I'm going to talk to you from the pages of my book, Michigan's Haunted Lighthouses. This is my first book. It came out in 2019 from the History Press. It was a great experience working with this publisher. They're actually out of South Carolina, and they sought me out to write this book. And I've actually been giving a variation of this presentation for almost 30 years. And I think they wanted someone to write it, and they Googled the topic, and my name kept showing up. So they called and said, hey, would you like to write this book? And it was really a great experience because I had 3 rules. I had to give them between 30 and 40,000 words. I had to provide between 30 and 40 photos. And I had to turn it in by Labor Day of 2018. The rest of it was up to me. I got to pick which lighthouses. I got to pick which stories and what photos were in there. And I think some of you may have gotten a handout of the map that's in the book. I'm going to show real quick. Whoops, I forget what direction this goes. I love remote controls when they don't work. Let's try this one more time. Come on.
You might have to shoot it at the machine.
It always wants a new battery or something else. Well, we're going to come up with a plan B in a second. If things go wrong, I usually just blame the ghosts. So I'm going to move this a little closer, and then we have this wonderful thing on our computer called the return button. All right. And nobody's going to jump rope over those cords, right? Okay. All right, for those of you who don't know, Michigan actually has more lighthouses than any other state. Did you know that? Yeah. 129. Of course you knew that. You're in a town with a lighthouse, right? 129 lighthouses according to the state of Michigan. The earliest lighthouse built is in, anybody know? Fort Gratiot. The very first one, 200 years ago. I think the current one was 1829. So, but the station itself over there 200 years ago. And so when the history press came to me and said, hey, can you write this book? And I picked actually 15 lighthouses to put in the original book. But 2 of the lighthouses on my original list I was forbidden to include. One of them was in this town. Well, I guess township out there. I had originally Tawas Point Light and Grand Traverse Light on my list. But somebody with the state of Michigan made the decision that the historic sites under the state of Michigan and the DNR wanted their lighthouses and their parks to focus on history only. They didn't want it to be clouded with ghost stories. So those 2 lights got cut off the list. And I guess in hindsight it was okay because it left me with 13 lighthouses, and that's a better number if you're talking ghost stories, right? Okay, so at the end of the program, even though Tawas Point isn't in the program, or in the book, I guess, I'll tell you a few stories at the end of the program as well. So we're going to start down in southwest Michigan, and we're going to make our way up Lake Michigan, and then we're going to do a little bit in the UP and then come down Lake Huron. And we're going to start with one of the most courageous men that served as a lighthouse keeper in Michigan, Captain James S. Donahue. He was a Civil War veteran. As you can see from his uniform here, it was very common for veterans of the Civil War to be given jobs as lighthouse keepers. It helped with some of that compensation for their service in the war. Well, his was quite interesting because he got injured in battle and he lost a leg. And he walked around on a peg leg. Now, how many of you have actually climbed a lighthouse in your life? Right? Can you imagine doing that on a peg leg? Up all those spiral stairs, carrying a pail of hot oil to fuel that Fresnel lens at the top? Dedication. He came into South Haven and he served there for 35 years. He raised his family there. They assisted in tending to the lighthouse keeping really was a family business. Because if for some reason he couldn't go out and do his job that day and that light doesn't get lit, what happens? It's a liability. What's the number 1 job of a lighthouse keeper? Keep the light going, right? There was no, I'm taking a personal day, a mental health day, I'm sick today, the weather's too bad. There was none of that. You had to do that job, and if he didn't, he would lose his job. He would lose his salary, which was about $400 a year, and they would lose the home that was given to them, a government property home. And so the family would step up in any instance and help out with those jobs. That's maybe why they had big families, right? Those kids were helping out whenever possible. So he actually had several other businesses in town. He ran a livery. He was active in several organizations. But what was really interesting in South Haven, their light is different than the one here. The house actually sits here. See up in that corner? That's where the lighthouse keeper residence is. And then he had to actually go down a set of stairs off the back of the property, walk all the way down along the Black River, then walk the pier or the catwalk, depending on weather, and then climb the tower on a peg leg. He sometimes used crutches, but still, that seems a little more challenging to navigate on spiral stairs, right? But he did that. He's credited with saving 15 lives during his years there. People, if they didn't have an actual life-saving station there, so he would have had to go out and help with rescues if ships were in distress, or if people on the beach got caught in undertow, he would have to go out and help rescue them. And so he would swim out and do that. Here you can see him, he's got his crutches here. And this is his extended family. His first wife died right after they moved into the lighthouse keeper residence in South Haven. And it's maybe her ghost that's there. We don't really know. But most likely it is Donahue himself. Now this is actually a museum. It is owned by the Michigan Maritime Museum, and it is a library and research museum. And they have worked with Western Michigan University. Do we have any Broncos? Go Broncos. Thank you. They've worked with Western to digitize a bunch of his old logbooks, which you can flip through online. And they have a bunch of photographs. If you're doing any kind of research on maritime things, lighthouses, shipwrecks, anything along those lines, you can request access to their archives and go and do research at their facility. So I actually gave a version of this program before the book came out on the lawn outside one night at dusk. It was so cool. And you can see the lighthouse in the distance, and I got to town, and before the program, they let me take a tour of the keeper's residence, and I was hoping Donahue was going to come out and introduce himself to me. I called out to him a couple of times, and I did not meet him that day, but volunteers there say that sometimes they're working on the main level, and they'll hear someone walking around upstairs. And it's not a normal cadence. As you would expect, it is kind of a shuffle and a thump of that peg leg that people can hear on that upper level. Now, I haven't had that experience yet, but I guess I'll go back another time and see if I can get him to come out and say hello to me. Next up the coast, we have White River Light Station, and this is in Whitehall. And this lighthouse was built primarily because of this gentleman, Captain Bill Robinson. He came to the Whitehall area in the 1860s with his wife, Sarah, and 7 of their eventually 13 children. Anybody ever been to this light to tour the museum? Can you imagine putting 13 children in that house? It is not that, well, part of it's an apartment now, but still, it's not that big of a space. I wonder how tall they had to stack them up in the corners. But anyway, he comes into to the Whitehall area. His father had already relocated there from England, and Robinson noted very early on that there was all of this traffic coming in and out of the White River. This was a huge lumbering area. After the fire, in the Great Fire in Chicago in 1871, this is where a lot of that lumber came to rebuild Chicago. And so the schooners were going out in just masses. And there was no lighthouse, and that concerned Bill. And so he was going out down to the lumber yards and taking notes. This ship with this captain is loaded up with this much of whatever board feet of whatever wood valued at this dollar amount. And he was sending it off to the U.S. Lighthouse Establishment to show them the need to have a lighthouse built there. At the same time, he would go out every night to the end of the river, and he would take a lantern, probably a little bigger than this one. This is a baby one. But he would take a lantern like this, and he would hang it on his shepherd's hook at the end of the river and crank it up as bright as it would go, so that if a ship came in after dark, they could see even the smallest flicker of a light to tell them where the river was, to protect them. And so he did that for several years before they finally committed money to build a lighthouse. And the ship showed up, the schooner showed up with all the materials, and they dropped it all there, and they said, all right, Bill, build your light. So he became the foreman on the project. And he hired a crew, and they built the light. It got done late in October of 1874. And instead of putting it into service that year, because in the Great Lakes our shipping would end, November, December, depending on the year, they decided to let it sit for the winter, and they would fire that baby up in the spring. And that gave them time over the winter to hire a lighthouse keeper. And over the course of the winter, all those ships' captains that had been coming in and out of there for years under his watchful eye, they started their own letter writing campaign to the U.S. Lighthouse Establishment. And they didn't ask Bill to be appointed, they demanded it. And so he came in April of 1875, and he lit that light for the very first time. And he worked there. His wife Sarah died in her late 50s of a stroke, and so I think the youngest kid at that point was about 16. He stayed on there and he worked at that light for 44 years. It is the only light he ever worked at. Several of his sons and grandsons became lighthouse keepers in the area. So this is a photo in about 1914 or 15 or 16. This is Bill here. And then to his left, or the far right of the photo, is his grandson William Bush, who was a keeper. And in 1918, Bill's health was getting really rough. He was in his mid-80s. And how many of you want to be tending a light in your mid-80s, right? That is, I don't want to do it in my mid-50s. But he was so dedicated to this light, and they didn't want to force him out. It was the only home he had here. And so they came up with a compromise. And the U.S. Lighthouse Establishment said, get one of your sons or grandsons to be the keeper, and you can still live there. So that's how grandson William Bush got the job. Well, it turns out that there was an inspection in the late 1918, and Bill Robinson got caught working in the tower. And I'm going to guess it wasn't the first time, because they told him that he had to move out. They said, you can stay for the winter, but when the ship service goes back in April of next year, you've got to move out. He was to vacate the lighthouse on April 3rd. He died April 2nd in the light.
Wow.
He got the last laugh, I think, on that. Because he has never left White River Light Station. He remains an active spirit there, as does his wife, Sarah. In the 1980s, when this became a museum, the woman who moved into the lighthouse, Karen McDonald, she said shortly after she moved in that she heard him walking around doing the rounds up at the Spiral Tower one night. And she was living there with her young son. I think her son was 7 or 8 years old at the time. And she said that she was comforted by the fact that Bill was there. Because if he was there checking and keeping an eye on his light, he would let nothing bad happen to them. And she worked there for almost 25 years and had all kinds of ghostly encounters, including one with Sarah Robinson. As I mentioned, Sarah died in her late 50s of a stroke. And during Karen's lifetime, when this photo of Sarah, you can kind of see it hanging in the museum, was gifted to the museum and she hung it up, another strange occurrence happened. Karen said that she was getting ready to open up the museum one day, and those of you who work and volunteer here or at other museums will understand that you got to go around and dust things. We got a perfect example right here. She had a display case there, much like this one, a wooden and glass top display case in one of the upstairs bedrooms. And so Karen went upstairs to dust that before the museum opened that day. And the phone rang. And this is back before we all walked around with our phone in the back pocket. She went downstairs and answered a landline. I like to think it had a curly cord and was attached to the wall, but it probably was cordless. So she sets her dusting supplies down. She goes downstairs to answer the call. She comes back up 10 or 15 minutes later, and she stops dead in her tracks because the dusting supplies had moved from one end to the other. She's the only one in the building. And all the dust had been wiped clean from the top of that display case. So here's an important question for everyone here. How many of you will take a ghost in your house if it helps you clean that house? It's like dusting is the one thing that never gets done at my house. So Karen knew that Sarah had a reputation as a meticulous housekeeper, and she knew that she was there that day. So she thanked her for her help and went about her day. Karen says that the whole summer long she kept those dusting supplies and she would put them on different pieces of furniture around the lighthouse to see if she could recreate the experience. Only happened on that one display in that one room. And we think that may have been the nursery, where her youngest children would have been, which would make sense for her to be in that space. Now, one of the things that I did when I was doing the final research on the book is I went to try to find the graves of all these keepers whenever I could. And Bill and Sarah are actually buried with several other members of the family in nearby Montague in a cemetery called the Mouth Cemetery, M-O-U-T-H, because it's at the mouth of the river. It sits next to a questionable piece of property that may or may not be a cult property. And the cemetery itself is rumored to be haunted. Anybody ever been out to the Mouth Cemetery? If you go, do not sit in the white plastic chair. They say if you do, you will die within a year. We took our preteen kids out there. What was the first thing they did? Sat in the white plastic chair. They're still with us, so I guess we're okay. This is another really interesting story. So this is Waugoshance Shoal Lighthouse. This lighthouse sits up southwest of Mackinaw City, near where Wilderness State Park is. Anybody know where that is? Or kind of Headlands Dark Sky Park is in that area as well. And it sits offshore. It was built in the 1850s to replace a lightship that floated out there, was anchored out there. And it was built on they built up like this cement crib and constructed this lighthouse there. And one of the early keepers there was a man by the name of John Herman. And John Herman came in 1887, and he served there until 1900. Who does the quick math on that? How many years is that? 13, right? When I wrote this book, I did not set out to find all of these stories that have the number 13 attached to them. But as I mentioned, Sarah Robinson gave birth to 13 children. And John Herman served for 13 years. And there's a couple more examples later in the program. It just kind of happened that the number 13 was showing up everywhere. So John Herman we don't have any photos of him, and I've been searching for years to find a photograph of him. But he was there for 13 years. He started as a second assistant and made his way up to the head position. 3 men would have lived in that lighthouse. No families were allowed out there. But in October of 1900, he is the head lighthouse keeper there. And on the night of October 14th of 1900 is when his story comes to an end. Now it is said that John Herman loved 2 things. He loved a good stiff drink and a good practical joke. And on October 14th, he had been into a tavern into Mackinaw City, made his way back out to the lighthouse, I'm assuming by horseback and then a rowboat, and then thought it would be funny to lock his assistant keeper in the tower. And if you envision it, you can, think about that assistant keeper running up the spiral stairs, and he gets to the top of the lighthouse, and I think, let me go back, I think this one shows it better. This is a birdcage style lantern room. It's the only one we have in Michigan, or had. So if you think about it, the assistant keeper runs up and he is yelling out to John Herman below, "This isn't funny, you unlock that door and let me out of here." And he is livid. John Herman has no intention of unlocking that door. He's down there just laughing because he's so funny to lock that guy up there. A couple of hours go by, and the assistant keeper, there's only one assistant there at the time, the assistant keeper sends a distress call to nearby McGulpin Point Lighthouse, which is also in Mackinac. That assistant comes over, unlocks that door, that assistant comes down, and he is ready to wring John Herman's neck. But they can't find him. He is never seen again. And they think in his drunken stupor that he fell over the edge and drowned, and he just floated off into the lake somewhere. Over the next 10 years, this becomes known as the most haunted light in Michigan. Men refuse to get transferred there because they don't want to deal with the ghost of John Herman and all of his jokes and his antics. He'll knock chairs out from underneath you. He'll open cupboard doors and rattle silverware. He'll shovel coal into the fire. And they saw it with no one holding the shovel. And finally, in 1910, they decommissioned the light. Supposedly because it's haunted. Well, in reality, they decommissioned it because they had completed White Shoal Lighthouse, which is the candy cane light out in the middle of Lake Michigan. And what this light was built to tell mariners, stay away from this part of the shoreline. I guess I should do it this way. Stay away from this part of the shoreline because it's dangerous. Now White Shoal is automatically telling people, come over here where it's safe, right? So they decommissioned this light, and it sits there in ruins until the 1940s. And it's used for bombing practice during World War II. Quite interesting, right? I'll show you a picture of what it looks like today. Now, when I was doing this research, and again, trying to find this photo of John Herman and my dad, who was a genealogist and a historian, and he was helping me with some research. I'd given him a list of all the names and what I knew about these keepers, and he calls me one day and he goes, hey, I think I found something about that drunk keeper. Okay, John, what do you find about John Herman? He says, well, I found his death certificate. I said, well, that's great because death certificates have great information on them, right? So what we found out was that he did in fact die on October 14th of 1900, but he'd had a heart attack on Mackinaw Island 4 days before.
Oh, wow.
3 days, sorry, October 11th. So, how is it that keeper got locked in the tower that day? Follow my logic. And when you're talking about haunted stuff, you can go with some logic, but follow this. What if the reason they never found him was that it was the ghost who locked that assistant keeper in the tower? This was the very first practical joke that ghost did. John Herman died at 1:30 in the afternoon. The assistant was locked in that tower about 11 at night.
Wow.
The timing was about spot on, right? That's my theory. Now, we did actually find his interment record. He's buried at St. Anne's Catholic Cemetery on Mackinac Island. A short description, then also noting his 13 years of service there. This is what the lighthouse looks like today in 2019, after all that bombing. And all the Straits of Mackinac are really rough on things with the thawing and freezing in the winter. It's decaying. It is on the doomsday list. The birdcage is still there. There was a guy by the name of Chris West. He had a company. He has a company in Mackinac called Ugly Ann Boat Tours. Takes trips out to St. Helena Island. He created a preservation society, and he had high hopes of being able to restore that light. And in 2019, when the water levels were high and there was so much damage, he brought a Corps of Engineer person out, and they came back and they said, oh, you want to just stabilize it? We'll build a coffer around it. And I only know the word coffer because of Oak Island, the curse of Oak Island. But if you want to build a coffer around it, protect it, $650,000. Chris signed the lighthouse back over to the federal government the next month because there was just no way. And I said to him, why didn't you get the bird cage off the top? Put it in a museum. Because when this falls down someday, I'm guessing within the next 10 years, we have pirates in the Great Lakes, if you didn't know. And somebody's going to come and steal that. I guarantee it. In the middle of the night, it's going to fall down and someone's going to take it and we're going to lose it, which is really unfortunate. All right, we're over the Mackinac Bridge. I did all the driving, so those of you who are afraid of bridges, we're good. We went US 2 to the west, and then we took a turn south to Gulliver to the Seul Choix Point Lighthouse. I took Spanish in high school, and it took me like 7 years to learn how to say Seul Choix, because I didn't take French. We have no French name or Spanish named lighthouses in Michigan, but we got quite a few French names. So Seul Choix Point Lighthouse actually is one of the most haunted lighthouses. There are, not only in my book, but they have 5 books. I just bought the last 3 when I was up there this summer about all the ghost stories at this light. So if you go to this light and you see, you hear, you smell, you feel, you get a weird photo or video, and you report it back to them, they keep a binder of all that information, and then the museum keeps publishing books of all the ghost stories. They're proud of them. Maybe they need to come talk to the state people. Because you know how many people go to this light because it's haunted? A lot more than are afraid to go to a light because it's haunted. All right. So this is Captain Joseph Willie Townshend. And he came into the lighthouse and started around 1901, and he served there for how many years? 13. 10. Sorry. Had to get you, right? He was there for 10 years, and then he died, one source says, of lung cancer. He was a big cigar smoker. And his wife, which was his third by this time, said, well, you can't smoke in the house, which is funny because people will still smell cigar smoke in there today, attributed to him. But he died, and they embalmed him in the basement of the lighthouse. Not this time, but the time before when I went up there, they're like, you want to tour the basement? And I'm like, I'm going to take a hard pass on that. But they embalmed him in the basement, and he lay in state here in the parlor. This is added for the museum, but he would have lay in state at the bottom of the stairs in the parlor here for 3 weeks. Because his family didn't live in northern Michigan. This is 1910. It takes a minute to get there by train, and then a car ferry, and then another train. So his family comes in, he finally has his service, and he's buried in nearby Manistee. But over the years, people have seen his face in the mirror. They smell that cigar smoke. They see him looking out upstairs windows. He likes the kitchen. They'll lock the whole lighthouse up, go home for the day, come back the next morning. One of the chairs is pulled away from the table at his spot, and the silverware is messed up. Like he came in and had supper. All kinds of stories. He likes to open up the cabinets. He is very active. They actually think they have 5 ghosts out there. Might be a ghost of a young girl. And they've had quite a few investigations out there as well. Now, when I went to pay my respects at his grave, I took him a gift. Took him a cigar. In hindsight, I should have gone back like an hour later to see just what if that had happened. All right, we're up on Lake Superior now. How many of you would like to spend the night with the ghosts? This is the only lighthouse bed and breakfast operating in Michigan at this moment. The Big Bay Point Lighthouse, which is northwest of Marquette. Big Bay is a historic little town. Henry Ford used to own it. There's the Thunder Bay Inn, so you can stay there. And there are ghosts in that building as well, so you can have a little experience. They have a place called the Lumberjack Restaurant. Anybody know what happened there? A well-known murder. Became a book, and then a movie called Anatomy of a Murder, all in this town. You can actually go to that bar, I'm taking a little aside here, but you can go to that bar, if you order a burger, it comes with a giant steak knife in the middle of it. And they moved the bar because where the bar was where the barkeep was murdered in the 50s, and the public couldn't get back there, so they moved the bar, so now they have an outline of where the barkeep died. And it's common for people to lay down there and take selfies on the floor. A little morbid. All right. I want to actually back up. I just thought of something about, I'll go back to it here. I thought about something about William Townshend, Captain Willie Townshend from Seul Choix. Before he got to Seul Choix, he was working at Waugoshance. He was an assistant to John Herman. There's a 50-50 chance he was the guy locked in the tower on that night in October. I found that out during late research as well. Sorry, all of a sudden just remembered that. Okay, so here at Big Bay we had Keeper William H. Pryor. No photo of him, but he lived at the light with his family. Several of his logbooks still exist, and if you read through them, I'm trying to think of a good word for him that's not too mean. He was kind of cantankerous. He was ornery. He hated all of his assistant keepers and he complained about them all the time. They were always too lazy. They wanted to go fishing all the time. How many of you would rather go fishing than go to work? Right? Even if you're not a fisherman, you might want to rather go fishing than go to work. Well, he was finally able, in the early 1900s, to get his son Edward, Edward George, who also went by George Edward, as an assistant keeper. And I think that appeased him a little bit. That was a little easier for him to deal with. And his son worked with him for about 18 months until his son had a slip and fall accident, cut his shin so deep it exposed the bone. And in his logs, William Pryor talks about, we took my son to the hospital today, which was been in Marquette, to be treated. Well, this is again early 1900s. The kid did not get adequate care. Gangrene set in, and the kid died from the injury.
Wow.
And William Pryor's last log entry was, we buried my son today.
Wow.
He was last seen, this is his son's death certificate. His son is buried at the Holy Cross Catholic Cemetery in Marquette. The last time anybody saw William Pryor was in September, October of 1901. He was headed off into the woods near the lighthouse with a rope. And the following year, his remains were found hanging in a tree.
Oh my gosh.
And I imagine his remains were probably buried in the woods out there. His family was Catholic. He would have not been allowed to be buried in that cemetery since he had committed suicide. But to this day, people will see him walking around outside of the lighthouse grounds in his uniform. He's described as having thinning red hair, which was an accurate description of him. He also likes to hang out in the kitchen. I don't know what it is with these ghosts in kitchens. They're hangry, I guess. But one of the former B&B owners, and I had stayed there many years ago, said that every so often she would hear the cupboard doors opening and banging in the kitchen in the middle of the night. And she'd have to go down there and say, just knock it off. I've got to get up and fix breakfast for everybody at 6 o'clock, and nobody wants to hear what you're doing, so stop it. And he'd go away for several months, and then he'd come back and start banging cupboards again, and she'd have to go scold him again. Also near this area in Marquette is the Marquette Harbor Lighthouse. And this was a new one in my research that I found. This one has the ghost of a young girl. The museum folks describe her as about 7 years old. She is often seen in a dress from the early 1900s. She likes women, so if you're there, sometimes if your hands are by your side, she'll come and try to hold your hand, or they'll hear her laugh. And there are occasions where wet footprints, children's footprints, show up inside the lighthouse, as if she's just come in from a swim. And they call the girl Jessie. So as I was doing research, this is great. Early 1900s, girl Jessie. So I go to the list of all the lighthouse keepers, and then I go to the census, and I try to find a lighthouse keeper family that has a daughter named Jessie. But I didn't find one. I had one that had a boy named Jesse in 1850s. Not quite what I was looking for. So I started to dig a little more, and I actually reached out to a friend of mine, a couple friends who are paranormal investigators, and I said, okay, if a space is haunted by a child, does that mean that that child died in that building at that time period? So if I'm looking for a little girl about 7 and from the early 1900s, does that mean a girl died in that building at the age of 7 in the early 1900s? And they said no. They said basically And I love this thought. When you die, your spirit can come back when you want. So you would probably want to come back at a time in your life when you were really happy, right? Unless you die tragically, and then you might just haunt people. But if you're going to come back, and I found this comforting, like you could come back at, like as if you're going to be in this space beyond eternity, you want it to be a place you like, a time period you like. And so I thought, who would want to be 7 in the early 1900s at this lighthouse? And that led me down a path to the Carlson family. And this family story I've known for many, many years. This is Robert Carlson, his wife Anna. They were the lighthouse keepers at several lights in the Apostle Islands. Their children, their daughter Cecilia, and their sons Robert and Carl. And they had been, like I said, in the Apostle Islands. They had a tragic winter one time at Michigan Island, and they decided to stay for the winter, and Robert went off to go fishing and didn't come back and left a distraught mother there with these 3 children. She was from Chicago, and in this article, she talks about the loneliness of being on an island in Lake Superior all by herself with these children and how she thought she might go mad. And she didn't know how to milk the cow, but she needed to get milk for the children. And this article from the 1930s gives all of this story. And I looked back and thought, okay, I wonder, because I think the ghost is their daughter, Cecilia. Do you think Cecilia wants to go back and live at the lighthouse here as a ghost? Probably not, right? She goes from there to Marquette, and then from Marquette, the family ends up, and father did come back, by the way. He was only gone for 4 days. And went on to become a keeper for another 30 years. They worked for 30 years at Whitefish Point, which is also haunted. And while they were here, at the age of 16, Cecilia gets married to an older gentleman. She has a daughter named Bertha. And then she divorces this guy, and she's living in the census data with her parents at the lighthouse. And he's living in a boarding house. So the marriage just doesn't seem like it's a good fit, right? Well, then she remarries the same guy, which I don't know why, and has a son with him. And then Cecilia ends up spending the last 18 years of her life at the asylum in Newberry. Don't know why she got sent there, but maybe she tried to get a second divorce, and her husband sent her there. Or maybe something else was going on. I don't know. But all I know is that she spent her last 18 years of her life there. She gets tuberculosis, and she dies in that asylum. So do you think this is a real happy place for her? Certainly the asylum isn't a happy place for her. But those few years in Marquette were where she was happy. There was no trauma. There was no bad marriage. There was no asylum. And that's why I think that she is at that lighthouse. Now, interestingly, Whitefish Point is also haunted by several spirits. Of course, this is the 50th anniversary of the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald. So that and all the other shipwrecks, you have all of those spirits in this area. But there's also a ghost in this bedroom upstairs here. And it's of a young girl. She's about 7 years old. And they've identified her as Bertha, Cecilia's daughter. And this is another reason that I think that Cecilia's at Marquette and her daughter are having mirrored experiences, because Bertha lived into her 90s in this area. The lighthouse here was her favorite place on earth. If you go through this museum, you will see a lot of family artifacts, Carlson family artifacts that she donated. She wrote a book about growing up out there. She helped establish the Shipwreck Museum and Complex there. So this is her home. And so if she's haunting this place, this was another reason that I felt that her mother was at Marquette. There's all kinds of ghost stories. My friend stayed here. This was a bed and breakfast for a while. Now they use it for housing for staff. But my friend spent the night there one night, and she said she woke up in the middle of the night because what felt like a child ran her fingers down her face. So I was so excited to tell her when I found out who it was, that it was Bertha. All right, Saginaw River Range lights. We've taken a big jump over south of here, and this lighthouse was staffed in the 1860s by Peter Braun and his wife Julia. And Julia was actually one of about 50 women in Michigan to serve as lighthouse keepers. I got a whole other program on that. We'll do that one another time. But Peter comes in, and he's ill, bedridden very early on. And so she steps up and for 7 years does the job. He dies. She gets the job outright. Then she gets remarried to the locals tell me it was scandalous because he was younger. By how many years? 13 years. I think that's the last one. So she gets married a guy by the name of George Way, and he had never worked at a day in his life at the lighthouse, but somehow somebody got it in that she shouldn't have the job anymore, so they demoted her and put him in charge. She doesn't look very happy about that, does she?
No, we thought maybe they had the same artist draw the picture. In your book, when I first saw it, I was like, are they brother and sister, or are they a couple? My husband said, no, they have the same artist.
Oh, yeah. She's just evil looking.
Yes.
Well, then after that, the second husband died, and I always questioned if she killed him. Because she looks like she could off a couple husbands, doesn't she? Those eyes. I don't know. Her obituary said she was a good Christian woman, so I doubt she did it. But so in the 1980s, this lighthouse it was staffed by Coast Guard. And there were Coast Guardsmen who would hear footsteps and voices in the middle of the night after they would go to bed. And there was one particular guy, his name was Don, I think is how you pronounce it is Coimtus. Thank you. I can never remember how to say it. But I know who he is. So I had read about him, and I had the chapter written, and I took my draft chapter, and I went to the Bay City Library to do some research, and I'm in the local history room, and I'm asking the volunteer to find out where she's buried, because I want to go to the cemetery. And the lady couldn't help me, but all of a sudden, Don walks out from one of the aisles and goes, I know where they're at. Follow me. So I followed a strange man to the cemetery, not knowing who he was yet. So we go out to he goes, I need like half hour, I gotta do some extra research for an article. So I went over to the county building, did stuff, and then I followed him to the cemetery, and we're standing next to the grave, which I'll show you her picture in a minute. But we're standing next to the grave, and we're talking about the stories, and so I'm like, well, what do you think? Do you think the lighthouse is haunted? Have you had any experiences there? And he starts to tell me about these experiences that he's had, and I'm like, this sounds really, really familiar. And so we end the day, and I ask him if, he goes, well, you should come and talk about your book at the museum. I said, great. Or with the Historical Society. So I said, well, here's a piece of paper, write down your name, your email, and your phone number. So he writes it down, and I look at it, and I'm like, now I know why this, things are starting to click. I go get the chapter out of my book, I flip through it, I said, read this paragraph right here, and he starts to read it, and he goes, hey, that's my name. Someone else had relayed a story about him to me that was already in the book, in draft, and it was the guy I ran into at the library who took me to the cemetery to confirm the story. So it was just this really kind of a fun thing, and I've been back several times, but the next summer when the book came out, they invited me to do a book signing at the lighthouse. And this was done in 2019 when the tall ships were in town. And it was like 130 degrees that weekend. It was so hot. And so I sat kind of inside here. The lighthouse is actually being restored right now. It was pretty gutted on the inside when I was there. But it was funny because I'm sitting there, and that picture of of Julia is on the wall, and she's staring at me with those, like, you know, those Brady Bunch eyes where the eyes would move. For Gilligan's Island, they would do it on that too. She's staring at me because people walk in, and there's some people that are sensitive would walk into that building and they would go, somebody's here. Like there's something going on. Mostly like teenage girls. I got a lot of it from teenage girls. So they would come in, and then you'd hear them talking, and then they'd see me with my book, and I've said, yeah, you know, this lighthouse is haunted. We believe it's by Julia. And then I tell them that she might have killed those husbands, which is probably why she wasn't happy with me. Like, I have no proof of it, but it's a good story. And she just looks like it. So, toward the end of the day, I had an encounter with this little guy. And he was about 3. So, the entrance to the lighthouse, when you go in for the tours, at least during the tall ships, is on the other side of, on the other side of the tower here. But there's also a door back here off like the summer kitchen, and so all of a sudden, most people are coming in the main way, and all of a sudden I hear a kid running and giggling, and a woman yelling after him. And this little guy comes in from behind and steps 1 foot in the back door and goes, "Ghost, where are you?" And everybody in the lighthouse started to freak out. And his grandma came in, it turned out it was his grandma, and tried to get him to go with her on this tour of the lighthouse, but he kept coming in and staring at the picture of Julia. And then he would go down and look down the stairs to the lower level and, "Ghost, where are you?" And he'd talk in between the doors and the windows. And he ran around like that. She'd take him out and he'd come back. For 15, 20 minutes. I wish I'd have gotten their names. So toward the end, the grandma comes over and I said to her, "Yes, this place is haunted. Has he ever done this before?" She goes, No, this is the first time he's ever done it." Now his sister, who was about 5, was there, and grandma goes, "Well, he's never done it before, but she has. She's been seeing things for years." And I'm like, okay, well, clearly it's a hereditary thing, the family. And friends of mine, again, those paranormal friends, had told me, I was really new into the kind of the research part. They said if I had turned my phone on audio recorder and just set it there, I may have picked up what he was hearing. Because he was so engaged for so long that he kind of like, kids can hear things, like a dog can hear a whistle that we can't hear. Kids can hear things, or they hear things that, like, they're not predisposed like all of us are to say it doesn't really exist. You know, these kids just take it for what it is. So I wish I'd have gotten their information because I would love to know if he's still seeing things, if they've been back, kind of what the situation is. But I intentionally didn't get a picture of his face because, you know, somebody else's kid. So that was my experience at the Saginaw River Range Light. The last light tonight is actually Fort Gratiot, which we talked about at the beginning, being Michigan's oldest light station. The original light here built in 1825, this one I think in 1829. How many of you have been out to this one? Okay. So the first 2 lighthouses are going to give you the lay of the land. This is a beautiful park in Port Huron. And they actually do a paranormal investigation on the last Saturday of October. I think there's still space. It used to be $50. I don't know what the cost is this year, but it's a 6-hour investigation. Wow. And I have some photos that I'm going to show you from when we did that in 2018. Wow. So this is the fog signal building here at the lower part of the photo. The main keeper house, the assistant house, obviously the tower. I don't know what that one is. This one out here, that's the old original Fort Gratiot Hospital that they moved to this facility. And so, kind of give you from the opposite direction, the hospital's over here, fog signal, main keeper, assistant. So when you do these investigations, we divided into 4 teams, and each team started in a building, then you just move to a different building every hour or so. And I think they have a different group doing it from when we went, but they had a bunch of audio files online, and they have, like, if you've ever watched any of the TV shows with spirit boxes And all the gadgets that like Zach Baggins uses, these teams have them. And they let you play with them, which may or may not be smart. Divining rods, temperatures, thermometers, the little gun ones and everything. So we went in and did a little research ahead of time, and we knew one of the people that they were able to communicate with was Frank Kimball, and he was one of the longest serving keepers at this lighthouse. And so we thought, well, when we get there, we're going to see if we can talk to Frank. Well, or we want to talk to Bob. Lighthouse Bob was actually a more modern docent. He was there until he passed away, I think, in 2010. And they had encounters with him, which means when they have their spirit boxes going and they're asking, is there anyone here with us tonight? The name Frank had come up repeatedly over the years, as did the name Bob. And so we get there that night, we're going to look for Bob, we're going to look for Frank. It's the end of October, typical Michigan day, cloudy and cold. This is the photograph that I took when we got on site. That's the one my boyfriend took. He had taken photos on his phone before we got there that were normal. The 3 that he took in the tower were all upside down. The ones after that were fine. We have no idea how that happened. I took like 150 photos that night. He took like 12, and like 6 of his 12 were goofy. And we didn't look at him until later. So this was our first picture. We don't notice it till later, but that's an odd thing that happened. So we started in the keeper's residence, and I was actually just going through them with somebody else 2 days ago. We have, like, they will take one of the small mag lights and put it in a binder clip on the floor, turned off, and they will say, is there a spirit here? If so, can you let us know you're here by turning on that light? And there were times when that flashlight would turn on. They also use this very high-tech ghost hunting gadget. It's also known as a cat toy. It's those little balls that have bells and lights in them. And they'll place them around the floor, and during the course of the investigation, they will ask if there's energy or spirit in the room to move one of those. And there are several times where one goes flying across the room, and they just move everywhere. There were cold spots. We were picking up a lot of names on the spirit boxes, and so we had activity in every space we were in. We ended the night in the tower. And so at the end of the night, it's about 11 o'clock at this point. I'm sitting in the entryway getting video of weird flashlight activity. My boyfriend decides he's going to go up the tower. Now, I don't go up towers anymore because for somebody who loves lighthouses, I have one big fear, and that's heights and spiral stairs that are open. So I don't go up them anymore. And so he goes up and he takes what is I consider to be the most obligatory photo in a lighthouse. You gotta take one down the stairs, right? Everybody does it. You can actually see his feet over here. So he takes this photo, and then the next photo that he takes is this one. And I have a brighter version of it, but I'm gonna walk you through this one first, because this photo is taken, let me go back real quick. I'm gonna show you the tower. So he takes the first one way up here. That other photo is taken here. Okay? So more than halfway down. And he takes this picture, and here's what you can see, or you can maybe see. The edge of the lighthouse, right? The wall of the tower here and here, and the window, clearly. See all that? Here's the pole, and you can see kind of shadows of the light. That one you can actually even see the stairs, through the wrought iron. What you can also see are the lights of the fog signal building on the other side of the tower. How about that grass and that sidewalk? And all those park lights, right? He's standing there taking a picture like this, okay? Because you can see, whoops, let me go back, hold on. The outline of his phone. Here's his shoulder. How does his phone get in the picture if he's using the phone to take the picture?
Yeah.
Right? Now, one day, and so we see this, we don't see this till like 2 in the morning when we check in our hotel, and we're just baffled by this whole thing. I gave this presentation at a library that had like the digital televisions, and that intensifies the photos. And so this next photo is a photo of this photo on that screen, and you can see a lot more. So what you can also pick up is people inside the keeper's residence. That's the dining room wall. You can see the door frame, people standing there. Still see the fog signal building. You can see his left hand, his shoulder, still the phone. All of that stuff. It's like a photo inside the building and outside the building and then inside another building. It's like not even a double exposure. It's like a quadruple exposure or more. So, and just to show you, that's kind of what the fog signal looks like, you know, but it's lit up. It matches. So I want to go back to the original one real quick. So we get this, it's like 4 in the morning, or 2 in the morning, we figure it out in the hotel, we're like, what is up with this? We get home, we put it on our TV, we put it on my iPad, we're blowing it up, we put it on the computer, we're putting it on, because he uses an Android, we said, well, let's see what happens if we put it on an iPhone. We're looking at it in all these different ways. We send this photo to the paranormal team, we're like, what is going on? They're like, we have no idea how this picture came to be. So we go round and round. It's like 2 weeks. We can't get it out of our head on what is going on in this picture. So we decide to go back to the original photos on the phone and do the swipe up to get the metadata. And what we uncover is even more bizarre. This photo is taken, I don't remember the exact time, but the next photo, which was 3/4 of the way down, or 2/3 of the way down, this one, timestamp 23 seconds apart. I can tell you with 1,000% certainty that he cannot climb down all those stairs in the dark in 23 seconds. And in fact, 2 or 3 years later, we're still talking to the paranormal team about this. They took a high school track star, put him at the top, started the clock, and made him run down to where that second photo was taken as fast as he could, 1.5 minutes. There's no way, 23 seconds. But what could travel that fast? A spirit, right? Especially that whole thing about his phone being in his own picture. Him in his picture. So bizarre. We were talking to it with people over the weekend, trying to get our head around it. So if you go into an investigation there and you have really cool photos, be sure to send them to me later. I'm all about that. Before I wrap up, I do want to tell you about the ghost out here at Thomas Point Lighthouse. I learned about this from a fellow historian friend of mine, Fred Stonehouse. He is in Marquette. He has written dozens of books on Michigan history. He's got a brand new one out about the 50th of the Edmund Fitzgerald. But he talks about this little girl that is in the as a ghost at the lighthouse. And volunteers years ago, this book's probably 20 years old now, but there was volunteers coming in to get the gift shop set up, and they look over on that back set of stairs where the kitchen is, and there's a little girl sitting on the stoop, and she's got her hands in her face, and she's crying. And the volunteers think, oh my gosh, this little girl has wandered away from the campground, and she's lost. So they go up to try to talk to her to find out who she is. She turns around, opens the back door, and goes in the lighthouse. And they stop in their tracks. They hadn't unlocked the lighthouse for the day. And they went out when the door was locked. But she had gone in. And people have seen her upstairs in one of the upstairs bedrooms looking out as well. So I don't know who the little girl is. I haven't done a ton of research on it. But if anybody else has stories or knows about the little girl ghost out there, feel free to share those with me. I had talked to some of the volunteers from the lighthouse this weekend, and none of them had had any experiences. But do you have any experiences?
I haven't had an experience, but I've been out there when people have done paranormal research.
Oh, yeah?
They say that she's again about 7, something like that, and wears a pink dress.
What is it with these girls and little girls in pink dresses? It's probably the only color, pink and white's probably the only color they wore in the early 1700s, early 1900s. Wow. If you're looking for more information on lighthouses in Michigan, these are the 3 websites that I use most regularly. The Great Lakes Lighthouse Keepers Association, that's based in Mackinaw City. Terry Pepper, he used to be the president of the organization. He passed in 2019, but they're keeping his website going. So there is a profile for almost every lighthouse in Michigan on that site, and tons of information. He was one of the key people that I would run my research through to verify. And then the U.S. Lighthouse Society Archives website is also great. You can search ships there, lighthouse keepers. They have all kinds of great information there as well. And then I do have copies of all 3 of my books here. So we have Michigan's Haunted Lighthouses. And then the publisher came up with a children's version of that. That's for about 2nd or 3rd grade reader level. And then my second book, also in the dark tourism world, is Death in Lighthouses on the Great Lakes. So if you like lighthouses, history, and true crime, these are all cold cases. Because like, how are you going to solve a crime from 200 years ago? And so these are all lighthouse keepers who died mysteriously, were murdered, or committed suicide during the course of their service. So the 2 larger books are 22 and the other one is 13. And I have all of those up here. And if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer those or take any comments. But thank you for letting me share some stories with you tonight.
Thank you.